Warm greetings, Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies. Welcome back to CodedLockFilms. Today we have another commentary for you. This is the review that I did recently of the Good Time Entertainment version of Snow White. This one was really kind of an unexpected pleasure. There's plenty about it that I don't like, and I did go into that into the review. But you know, there was a lot that I liked about this one as well, and I think these movies generally benefit from low expectations in some regards. Like, I don't expect these to be good, so it's always a pleasant surprise when one of them does genuinely entertain me to a certain degree. But yeah, Snow White is not a story that I've ever had any particular affinity for. It just, I never really got it much. The only, I talked about Matt, I talked about this in a podcast briefly, the one I do with Matt. But really the only version of Snow White that I've ever seen, the only version of the character that I've ever found at all interesting is the version from Once Upon a Time, which was one of the topics that we talked about in the podcast, of course. But I was never all that interested in Disney's Snow White. But yeah, so this I guess there's plenty that you can do with this fairy tale, because it's about as basic as fairy tales get, and I do really think that this movie does some good stuff with it. When it comes to the review itself, if I have one problem with this review, it's that to me it feels sort of truncated at the end. And let me explain. So what I mean by that is, obviously, you know, you can't talk about everything when you're doing one of these reviews. It's just not temporally possible. You have to cut stuff out. But I feel like this one feels a little rushed towards the end, and that was something that came through mostly in the editing. It didn't feel all that truncated by the time that I like when I was doing the scripting or anything like that. I'll typically do a little bit of a cold read to any given script to myself, just to kind of see about how long it's going to run. And it didn't feel terribly truncated towards the end to me when I was reading it, but it feels like the review just kind of stops near the end of it. Even that's not correct to say. The fact that I skip a decent chunk of the content at the end of this movie, and maybe it just seems that way to me because I'm the one editing and I'm the one that's like seeing the entire movie and I know the ins and outs of everything. I mean, I obviously skip right from one trick played on Snow White by the Queen straight to the other one in basically a single sentence. I guess the reason I felt justified doing that in the script was the fact that, you know, at that point, you know, it's basically the same setup every time. You know, the Queen is in some kind of disguise and generally acting like a creepy weirdo, but Snow White trusts this person anyway. In the case of the third temptation of Snow White, as it were, that she's in this she's in the guise of like a little girl, and I kind of would have liked to have included some of that stuff. It just, again, it didn't feel like it was necessary when I was scripting it, but she has this kind of weird, creepy Children of the Corn affectation to her, that I do kind of wish I'd been able to put in there. But you know, again, it's just it's going through the same motions three times, and it just it doesn't feel. It almost felt like I would have been padding the review at that point, and I guess I wish I had kind of found a bit of a middle ground between feeling like it was padded and feeling like it was truncated. There's also another scene that I didn't cover in between those two events where oh god, I'll come back to this, and I'll come back to that moment in a second here. So, oh God, what was I saying? I'm sorry. I get so distracted by this little moment. Yeah, but there's a scene between the queen and the prince that I ended up cutting out, which it's. I guess the one thing that it kind of does in the context of the narrative is it puts a sort of it re-emphasizes the Queen's vanity in a way that is kind of fun to watch. Like, the prince comes in saying he's like looking for his lady love, and the Queen's just like, oh, I know I don't look it, but I'm really much too old for you. And it's kind of entertaining. The villain is ridiculous and fun to watch in her own way. But anyway, the Lotions and Potions thing, that every so often, I'll encounter a particular line in one of these movies. I call them the Howler Lines, just because they're the ones that make me howl with laughter, like the ones that are just so unintentionally hilarious to me that they completely catch me off guard, and I love them. And God, and in those instances, I often feel that what is best for me to do in the review itself is for me basically just to recreate my actual reaction to seeing that moment for the first time. And when I heard that Lotions and Potions thing for the first time, my God, I was just dying with laughter. Like, I had to pause the movie and I had to go back about a full minute because I had missed stuff, because I was laughing so hard. It was hilarious. That moment there, that Scooby-Doo where are you thing, I should finish the thought before I go into the Scooby-Doo where are you thing. Anyway, yeah, that line just completely destroyed me. And I'm glad that everybody else seemed to find it as funny as I did, because you never quite know whether a moment like that's gonna translate. Everybody's tastes in humor are different, and you never know what kind of weird combination of words is going to catch various people off guard or make people laugh. But the Lotions and Potions thing, it was hilarious to me, and I hope it was as funny to everyone as it was to me. Speaking of things that I hope were as funny to everyone as they were to me, that Scooby-Doo thing. That is easily the longest amount of time I have spent on any single joke. Part of me wonders if that particular joke is maybe a little bit too old for my audience, because my audience does skew a bit younger than I am. Generally, my audience tends to be about 5 to 10 years younger than I am, with some exceptions, but, that's what my analytics generally say. And when I saw the hand-drawn mist in that scene, I immediately thought of the opening to the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You theme song. It may not have been the original, it may have been the second one. I'm not entirely sure, but I thought of it, and I knew I was going to have to do that joke, and it was so involved and so complicated. But sometimes when I get an idea in my head, I just have to do it. The first thing I had to do was I had to take a still image from the movie. I actually had to take several still images and then cobble them together and kind of stitch them all together in Photoshop and repair some areas to create a blank scene without that fog in it. And then I had to I basically took the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You mist title animation and I traced over it frame by frame, which was not actually terribly hard because the animation back then was limited. And then I had to hand animate the fog going from its original shape in this movie to the small little blob that then becomes the big Scooby-Doo title. And the end result was really funny to me, but nobody commented on it, so I don't know if it was really worth it. But I don't know. I guess sometimes I gotta do things for me. But it was truly that one joke. It lasts about 3 seconds, and it probably took me about, I would say, 6 to 8 hours of labor. And I recognize that that's insane and it's so not worth it, but it was just so funny to me, and I had to do it. I had to do it. And I hope at least one person found it as funny as I did. But, again, sometimes I just have to do stuff. This is another thing I really don't get about this movie, is that one of the things that you often see in stories that involve magic is characters relying too much on magic and not nearly enough on logic. Like, I don't understand why the queen, I mean, I guess it's, the meta reason is that it's a kid's movie and she's not gonna cut Snow White's throat while she's helpless. But, it's like, I've never accepted that as an excuse. I've never accepted a meta reason as an excuse within a narrative, unless the narrative itself is designed to be a meta narrative. It's a sign of really weak storytelling when the only reason you can come up with for a character's actions is, well, because the story wouldn't exist otherwise. That means it's a bad story. Like, I've heard, like, the classic example is Gilligan's Island, with the professor who could, like, invent basically anything, but the one thing he couldn't build was a goddamn boat. And of course, the reason that he couldn't build a goddamn boat is because having a boat would end the series. But that's a really bad reason. It's a bad narrative idea, and that kind of thing has always irritated the hell out of me, which is kind of why I went on this little mini rant here about how the queen is just relying way too much on magic when applying simple logic, or even doing the exact same thing she's doing, but without the need for magic beyond her magical disguises, would be so much more effective. And I guess that's like I said, the villain is entertaining in her own way, but she's also just, she's profoundly stupid. And I guess that is part of what makes her entertaining, and I almost think it's kind of what they were going for. It seems like they wanted her to be kind of a comedic villain, just in how absurd she is, but I don't know. It's moderate success. I have to believe that there is some sort of self-awareness in these productions, because I see too many things. I hear too many of these goofy lines, and I see too many of these goofy plot turns that I can't honestly believe that at least somebody isn't kind of doing it on purpose. Like, I don't know. This prince is so creepy. I've actually had a couple of people say, they have, there's the huntsman in this movie that looks a lot like the John Smith character from the Pocahontas, the Good Time Entertainment Pocahontas movie. And I also had somebody point out, and I didn't realize this at the time, that the prince in this movie, his clothes and his hair are different, but his facial structure is basically exactly the same as the prince from the Good Time Entertainment Cinderella movie. And that's something that I'm fairly forgiving of, because when you've got a really underfunded sort of low-budget studio producing these low-budget things, one of the easiest ways to save on costs is to reuse a lot of basic character models, and then just simply and then basically just you take one character and you tack on different hair and different clothes, and they become a different character. And that's a pretty standard way of going about things when you're a small budget studio, at least certainly for the time when you're a really small budget studio and you have limited time and money with which to work. You use a lot of shortcuts, and I don't really have a problem with that. If it was the product of laziness, it would bother me more. But it's really not the product of laziness. It's the fact that they just don't have very much money to work with, and I try to be reasonable and understanding about that kind of thing. That's another one of that's the reason that basically that all of the dwarves in this movie, they're described as identical septuplet, identical septuplet brothers. The reason for that is that all they have to do is change the voices and change the color of their clothing, and then that's less money that they have to spend on animation and less money that they have to spend on character design. Yeah, but I don't know. Like I said, there was a lot that I really did enjoy about this movie. Again, none of the good time entertainment movies are what I would call good. There's too many problems with them on a minute to minute basis for me to call them good in an overall sense. But some of them do have really good things about them. Even the Pocahontas one, which I really, really hated. It starts off actually really promising, and there's some really good ideas at work in it. And there's some good stuff in this one as well. And I try to give credit where credit is due. And sometimes I succeed at that, sometimes I don't. But yeah, I don't know. But that's I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to say about this. I don't know. This one was just, sort of a fun one for me. I was just trying to enjoy myself as best I could with this video. Create something kind of light and something not too dense. And I think I did well enough at that. I think this one, it's just meant to be sort of basically entertaining. And I think I succeeded in that regard. So that is pretty much it for this one. I've gone a little bit over, but that's okay. So until next time, Code Monkeys and fellow VEDSies, I will see you tomorrow.